the opportunity to meet most of you. So just starting off with how I typically describe myself. My name is Pranav. I run portfolio and product management globally for a small company called HMD, which is a startup which has acquired the exclusive brand license for Nokia. So I essentially make phones, right? I've had my name being played up in many different versions. Pranay is the most famous. It becomes all kinds of things, but the one in the middle was the one that surprised me. This was Starbucks at Hong Kong, where they somehow decided to call me Mr. Blaney. So I don't know how that happened, but at least they found me hot and tall. So I kind of hold on to that image. Other than that, love music. Do you know what this is? What this signifies? Correct. That's all my influences of Finland. I've lived in Finland for about 5 years, so pretty much all of the beautiful things of Finland, like Carl Fazer comes from there. Yankee is a gum that I still use even 10 years after coming back from Finland. And salmiakki, which is like black candy. Have you ever had black candy? It's an acquired taste. I love food. I love adventure. So that's about me. Turns out, I've been asked to talk to you guys about product. I just want to do a little bit of show of hands, and because I was coming into this audience, I was actually checking on what do I talk to this community about, right? Because obviously my assumption here is a lot of you are founders who have built your business around product, and you have a proven product already. But then I'm also assuming, like I spoke over dinner or even this morning with a few of you, that you're potentially not coming from a product background and you have a differentiation in your business coming from either distribution or some kind of other factors. So I was actually reading up saying, so I'm talking to this audience, what is their biggest worry? And I've just listed down a few of the ones that were tested. This was a huge intersection of enterprise businesses, small and medium businesses, etc. And I'm just putting down some of the top ones that came out, right? So cash burn, GTM, the execution, hiring, fundraising, product execution. Does this resonate? Are these some of your biggest problems? Yeah. So it turns out, this is how this survey came out. This is SaaS benchmarks. You guys seem to be most worried about product. So no pressure. That's what we'll talk about a little bit. Now what I have tried to do here is I'm going to try to be a little greedy with you. Typically what I'm talking about here is 3 whole sessions, which each of them can actually form a complete discussion of its own. But I've tried to cram it all in. The agreement we should have is that if it gets too much, just raise your hand and say, let's just stop here and let's discuss. But I want to be greedy in terms of just leaving you at the end of the session with 3 things on product that I hope will change the way you look at your business or will help you just think different. Yeah? But it can get a little bit, so just tell me if it's like too much of gyan, too much of theory. I've tried to make it as applicable into your business as possible, but let's just have a free-flowing conversation at any point, yeah? So I'm going to start rolling. Do you know what this is? The hint is, look at the ships there. Bermuda Triangle, right? You know the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. The ships disappear. We don't know whether it's true. We don't know whether it's a reality, myth, solved, not solved. I have a new version of this. And the interesting thing is, Meeta did the session last evening. I'm assuming all of you attended that. So what I'm trying to do is just give you the flip side of the coin. Product and brand for me go hand in hand. When a brand person is talking about the Venn diagram and the intersection, for me, from a product point of view, it's exactly the same. I call it the Bermuda Triangle. And I believe that you need to maintain this balance. Otherwise, your ship is going to sink. And this is not a myth. This is a reality. For me, the 3 tips of this triangle are your market, broadly, market, competitors, all put together. What's happening in terms of trends, what's happening in the competitive space, that's at the top. On the left side is your consumer or customer insight. Remember, Meeta spoke about the customer insights. It's exactly the same thing. Looked at it from a product point of view. And then third is your core value proposition. What do you stand for? And ultimately, when you look at your business, when you look at everything that you do, when you step back and look at anybody who's reasonably successful or very successful, it's about how have they navigated these three, how have they navigated this triangle, right? How have they kept a balance between what's happening in the market or how they've created the market versus what their core pain point of their customer segment is, or what the solution is that they're offering, and what is their core proposition that brings it all together. Theoretical, right? Let's look at an example. This is a brand that is obviously very, very close to me. No points for guessing. It's probably even written out there, but it's Nokia. We all, some of you probably, by the time you grew up, this brand was dead, as I learned. I was talking about Symbian yesterday at dinner, and our friend here was like, I'm sorry, what is that? Because then I realized that it actually happened and died before some people in the room were born, which is a very great reminder of my age. But Nokia, at one point of time, used to rule the roost. In a market like India, it was 70% market share. It was known for innovations. It's probably the first phone that a lot of us in the room ever used. Created all of these iconic form factors back in the day, right? Huge competitive advantage, pretty much had everything that it takes, and then this happened. This is Nokia's market share in 8 quarters. The top there is 35%, the bottom there is 3%. This happened in 8 quarters for a global giant with pretty much everything that they had in terms of differentiation, product strategy. They had a lot of barriers to entry that they had created because they used to, I know the inside story of the 3G mafia, right? So you go into a European carrier and you say, hey, I have a 3G phone. Very relevant in today's 5G times in the Huawei conversation. I have a 3G phone. I'll let you range it and I'll let you sell it to your customer base only if you take my network. If you had any questions on why Nokia was so dominant, this is exactly how they did it. So it was like a barrier to entry created wherein you cannot let a guy have your handset, which was obviously the most innovative factor unless they invest in your back end. But yet this happened. Let's apply that Bermuda Triangle. This is why it failed. And this is probably the easiest way I can explain to you everything that happened with the company. So at the top of it, no points for guessing, there was this guy called Steve Jobs who was completely transforming how people used mobile, right? And we all know the story. I'm not going to bore you with the 2006, the first iPhone. Nokia, by the way, laughed at this guy. They said this is a product that's never going to sell. There are interviews of an arrogant CEO laughing at what this guy was bringing. But anyway, that is not important. Do you know why the glove is here? And this, if you don't recollect, is your consumer/customer insight in that corner. No, there's a very interesting story. So Nokia is based in Finland, right? Somebody here said it. All of the, sorry? No, I'll just come to that. So, what did Apple bring with the first phone? What was the transformation? Touchscreen. Do you know that Nokia actually had a touch-enabled product, full touch-enabled product 1 year before Apple? But they decided to shelf that project. Do you know why? Because the research department and the product department sat in Finland. And in Finland, it's cold for 6 months of the year. And people wear gloves. So this little country, which obviously led all the mobile innovation, decided that this technology can never survive because it does not work with gloves. So they actually decided not to productize touch. And then that guy came, and you know what happened internally? I was a part of that project. We were asked to bring back that project and launch it as soon as possible, which happened 1.5 years after the first iPhone. And it was called the Nokia 5800 Touch, which could have happened 1.5 years before Apple. This is how, obviously, consumer and customer insights are important, but also interpretation of that is important, right? Number 3, product. Why is there a band-aid there? This I'm sure the oldies in the room will get. You shouldn't even try. So this is about, at that point of time, it was about ecosystems, right? It was about OSs. right? And Nokia had Symbian. The way they were trying to keep Symbian relevant to the emerging needs of the industry was by putting tape. It was massively bloated. It was not built ground up for things like touch, etc. And they were just trying to tape the solution. And you knew that at some point of time, it was all going to just burst open and collapse. So this is how, apart from all the people factors, and I'm leaving that here, arrogant top management, a middle management that did not want to tell the reality to the top management and only told them what they want to hear. If you leave all of that aside, if you just want to apply this triangle, this is exactly what happened with the Nokia. Let's look at a couple of successful examples. Remember this guy? He started in university with Face Mash, where he stole pictures of hot girls and did a hot or not. He got massive backlash for this. Then he took it public and he used EDU email IDs. His whole product was dependent on email. Why did he use EDU email IDs? Because that is when an educational institute gives you an email ID, it's identifiable. You know the person. No education institute will give you an ID unless it's authentic. So he built his product on Harvard University EDU IDs, and then at some point, was it 2006, 2007, that became Facebook when he took it public, right? And again, the rest is history. This guy's business went like this. At the top there, I'm talking active users. He has 2.46 to be specific billion active users on his platforms today. Right? What happened? Let's apply this. I'm not even going to talk about the products. All of us are so intricately familiar with everything that he has built or acquired. Each one obviously has its own competitive set, but we know exactly what's happening there. There was the whole FOMO happening, right? In a sense, he actually created that. And I'll talk a lot more about that consumer behavior. There was also the whole Facebook thing of 6 degrees of separation becoming 3.74. All of this is happening in the consumer world, or even the marketplace where you can sit at home and you can buy and sell without having no other technology at your disposal. Remember that guy there? Remember Orkut? This guy managed to keep himself up to date, current, built on consumer insight, keeping in tune with what's happening in the market. Instagram was what, 18 people, 12 people, 18 months, and then this guy acquired them, right? So successful case. I don't want to harp. I'm just trying to get us to kind of look at this triangle in different ways. Now, when we talk about products, the model, quote unquote, that I always hear is better, faster, cheaper, right? All of us know this. So you have a Freshworks that just made everything much better than you had ever seen before. You have an Amazon which promised to bring stuff to you faster than ever before. You had a Xiaomi, closer to my industry, which is promising cheaper, right? That's why people buy it. It's value for money, it's cheaper. But is there today a curse of this better, faster, cheaper? The question for you is it coming in the way of innovation? Is it coming in the way of experimentation? Is it coming in the way of new thinking? Of course, that's for you to guess and for you to figure out whether for your business the incremental is enough. In a lot of cases it is. But what you see today is that has been flipped. Because earlier it was like, I am operating in an industry, if I'm better, if I'm faster, if I'm cheaper, I'm guaranteed to win. Today you're not, right? This one is very interesting. Do you know this? Anybody? Yeah, 1979 model, right? 5 forces. If you don't know it, it's a very simplistic model of looking at competitive forces in an industry. What Porter said back then is there are 5 forces in any industry, right? Let me talk through it very quickly. Threat of new entrants is basically barriers to entry. There was a time when you needed huge capex investments. You created barriers to entry so that the other guy, and especially if he's a small guy, just can't enter, right? Secondly, substitutes. Everybody kept looking at, can anybody build a substitute for my product that completely makes me irrelevant? And if that happens, then obviously I'm out of reckoning. Competitive rivalry. Who is the established player? How is the interplay between the different players? On the right side, bargaining power of your suppliers in your supply chain, and then bargaining power of your customers. Now, I was thinking about this, and this is open to discussion here, so just so that you guys don't keep hearing my monologue. How does this apply today? 30 years or so down the line. And my interpretation of it is, there are no barriers to entry today. You cannot stop anybody from coming into your industry. Similarly, nobody can stop you from getting into an industry because it's a level playing field today. Secondly, substitutes. You cannot keep an eye on that. Technology, innovation, human intelligence, etc. If you are going to keep an eye on, hey, somebody will come and substitute my product, you're just watching your back and you're going to stop innovating. Completely irrelevant in today's time. Competitive rivalry, does it matter who's number one today? Fortune 500 companies in 1990, I think 70% of them don't even exist today. And that's pretty fast given the pace of innovation in this industry. Not relevant at all. Bargaining power of suppliers. Of course, supply chain is important. Of course, they hold a lot of power. But again, you are not dependent on their quotations anymore. You are not dependent on their responses anymore. You can go and check. It's a global marketplace. Anyone can go and check anything about anything today. And therefore, their bargaining power is also lesser. But you know what? This guy suddenly became the most dominant force. Because again, this guy wants to self-search, self-research, understands everything, does not depend on your seller potentially going and selling a product pitch to them, does not depend on limited information that is shared with him or her, and this guy is literally ruling the roost, right? So if you just start now thinking about how this whole world is developing, for me, this guy, and I am a product guy, I have not spoken a single thing about products so far, but the most important thing for me is how do you get into the head of your customer or your consumer, and how do you think about how you make them change their behaviors, habits, etc. I'll come to that. Do you know this picture? It's a very, very famous picture. So this is Vatican. This is the announcement of the new Pope. Happened in 2005. They are all waiting for the white smoke, right? The white smoke, was it white? Yeah, the white smoke basically announces that the new Pope has been selected. Until then, everyone's in a room, etc. This is 2013. What do you see as the change there? There you're a part of that. Here you're capturing that. What has happened in the middle is the whole mobile revolution, and you can see that products have the ability to profoundly change behaviors. That small little thing there, right? And look at this. It's literally the same position. This is a fascinating picture for me. I can go back and look at this forever. And this is what products do to our behaviors, right? And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more on that. And I was so excited yesterday when some of you in the room spoke habits, spoke hook, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with Ruchit as well. How many of us are intricately familiar with the hook model? Fantastic. I would say it's about 60-40. What I'm going to do, if the guys who know this really well, I'm going to very quickly bring the rest of us up to speed with what this model is. But then I want to talk about applicability, right? So there's this guy called Nir Eyal who has created a model that's pretty much transformed my life and transformed everything about how I approach a product problem, a product solution, how I approach anything to do with products. Because ultimately, like I said, everything is about customer behavior. He speaks about 4 things, right? First is the trigger. And I'll talk to you. I have a couple of examples of each of them, but just stay with me. And again, this is where the part about zyada ho gaya, too much, stop, let's discuss is completely relevant, yeah? So trigger is what is that external or internal trigger that will make your user use your product. Simple enough, right? You want your user to use the product, you identify the trigger. Number 2 is the action. What is the simplest action that you can make that user do in anticipation of a reward? You make them do an action so that they get a reward. The most transformational thing in this model is that reward. It is not reward alone. If there's one thing you take away from this whole model, remember the word variable. And I'll tell you why. It's about variable reward. How do you give a fulfilling reward to your user, but make them come back for more. That's where the variability comes in. So you're giving them a reward because we love being rewarded, but then how do you make them come back for more? How do you keep them longing for more? And the fourth one is investment. How do you get your user to put that little bit of work into your product to build stickiness? Now let's examine this in detail. Now the simplest thing, and we're talking trigger here. External triggers are the most obvious. All of us insert it. All of us see it in real life. So click here, tweet this, buy now, do this, or in the real world, soda machine, press this button. Those are all external triggers, right? It's pretty simple. All of us inject these triggers. All of us make sure that in the relevant places we have our product's triggers already built in. But turns out what is a lot more powerful are internal triggers. And these are not typically thought through. These are not given enough importance. So, I'm feeling lonesome today. I'm bored. I'm indecisive. I'm feeling stressed. These are internal triggers. And turns out that negative emotions, if you look at these, most of the ones that I've put there are negative emotions. They are very, very, very powerful internal triggers. Let's do an exercise. You're feeling lonely. What do? You go to Facebook. Yeah? You're feeling unsure. What do? You go search on Google. Google gives you all of the answers. Yeah? You're at work. You're feeling bored in the afternoon after a heavy meal. You want a break. Go to YouTube. These are internal triggers. These are associations that are built with certain negative emotions that we have inherently. These are the most powerful. Let's take an example of Instagram. External triggers on Instagram. How did all of us discover Instagram? Somebody posted a picture on Instagram and then they put a link on a Facebook or wherever we were, and that's what drew you into Instagram, right? That's your simple external trigger. Now let's do an example. Somebody, what was the last picture you took? This slide, yeah? Why did you do that? You wanted to capture the moment. You wanted to refer to it later. You wanted to actually have something that you can go and relive later. That is your internal trigger. As simple as that. That internal trigger is what Instagram is built on, right? But it's so much more. It's a social platform today. It allows you to do multiple different things. But today we have internal triggers and negative emotions, either in terms of I just want to go out there and connect. I have FOMO. I'll keep opening up Instagram whenever I'm free. And I'll talk about Instagram again when I come back and talk about variable rewards, right? I have now associated, without knowing it, Instagram with triggers such as capturing moment, FOMO, need for connection, etc., etc. You can apply this to pretty much anything. I'm keeping it quite superficial at this stage, so you know what I'm talking about. This is the role of triggers. We'll then come and pull it all together. Let's talk about action. Yeah, action, like we established, is that simplest behavior in anticipation of a reward. Think of a scroll on Pinterest. Why do you do it? Because you think you're going to discover something new here. You think you're going to get some new information. It's a simple action. You're just scrolling, or a play button on YouTube, or just think about any simple action that you make your user take. The actions are absolutely simple, right? But then it is in anticipation of getting certain rewards or certain information or something that you did not know. That is action. This one is thoda gyan, but this is also important. There's a guy called Fogg, I think in Stanford, who had created this model. And he basically says, since a lot of us love mathematics here, B is equal to MAT. M is motivation, A is ability, T is trigger. All of this coming together at the same time drives behavior, right? Turns out, and he's taught us, motivation is essentially, if you just think of our behaviors, right? This is at the simplistic level. We seek pleasure, we want to avoid pain. We seek hope, we want to avoid fear. We seek acceptance, we want to avoid rejection. It's as simple as that. That is human behavior, right? Motivation is actually something that drives us to do something. Ability is the capability to do it. He classified ability into some of these. Time, super easy, right? Do I have the time to do it? That drives my ability. I do not have the time, I can't do it. Do I have the money to do it? How much of physical effort does it involve? Brain cycles, is it too complicated? If it's too complicated, it's going to not be motivating enough for me, right? Social deviance, is everybody doing it, or do you want me to do something very different from it? Non-routine, is it something that will make me break out of my routine and do something differently? Then my motivation is low. And then trigger, you see that purple line there? You want to be on the purple path or on the right side of that. So when all three of these come together at the same time in the optimal mix is when you drive behavior. Very, very, very simple example is of a, let's take a telephone call, right? You're getting a call. You can either take it or not take it. Give me an example of motivation there. Call ringing, motivation. High motivation, low motivation. What could be the example? No, so I have a call that's alerting. The call is ringing, but I do not take it. Why? It could be I saw who's calling, it's a telemarketer. I don't want to waste my time. I'm not motivated to take their call, right? Ability. I am sitting in a meeting. I do not have the ability to step out at this point of time to take the call. So even though I might want to talk to you, I couldn't take the call. I was not able to. Or my phone was lying far away and I did not have the ability to walk there to lift the phone, right? Trigger. An example of a trigger. The phone didn't ring. You called me, it was in my pocket. I did not know that it was ringing, so I couldn't lift your call. These are examples of low motivation, low ability, low trigger, which would result in an action of you not lifting a call. Just to map out how M, A and T coming together at the same time in the optimal mix can drive behaviors. Yeah? Let's see if this works. Let me give a bit of example. So instead of me again, and I had expected that it would be a monologue till this point, but I found this it's a very old video. It's a very short one of a lady explaining all of this in terms of a Facebook feed. And what went right and what went wrong with the Facebook feed, applying the same fog model. I don't know if the audio works. Let's see if this works, or then I'll explain it for you. Can you hear?
Okay. That's part of what makes Facebook so fun and addictive, where you follow your friends' content, and it's pretty behavior on the web. Understand this, everything is how computer model we use to level up. Behavior occurs when motivation, ability, and triggers converge. This leads to the design mantra for behavior change. What hot to do in the past of motivating people? The need to destroy it because it does. Links and images, other content, possibly, in the path of people who want to see it. You've been a long-time user, you might remember when Facebook posted the ads in the newsfeed. This is an example from 2007. There's a lot of backlash against these ads, however, and Facebook removed ads from the newsfeed shortly after. Instead, Facebook found something that works even better. These are updates from fan pages the users subscribe to. These will show up in the news. Here's an example from Windows Update announcing that the toggle store. But unlike ads, these updates have seen no backlash or angry users. So what's the difference? The difference is in the user's motivation. If you have fan page updates in your feed, just because you're motivated to use them, you subscribe to them. The motivations of users are really powerful. It makes all the difference if they want to see your ad or if they don't. If they do, if they're motivated, then all you have to do is find a way to put hot triggers in your make it. But if they don't, if they're not motivated, your hot triggers will only be seen as something unknown. They full of generating anger and frustration. Luckily, the web makes it even easier to find your motivated audience. And then, all you have to do is put hot triggers in the path of those motivated people. To learn more about the knowledge behaviors.
Is that making sense? Do you get the concept of hot triggers? How do you motivate? How do you increase ability? Number one. That's something that you can do with your product. How do you increase motivation? by inserting hot triggers in the path, in the customer journey, to make sure that there are certain behaviors that you can drive and make them want more. There is this guy in our brain. He's called the nucleus accumbens. Are you familiar with that? You are. Okay. You can help me out here because I don't know so much about it. But what I know about it is that this guy can get triggered. And there was an experiment that two guys did in some university somewhere, super smart guys, I don't remember them, who did this exercise on a rat where they actually use electrical signals to stimulate this part of the rat's brain. And what they noticed is that the rat went crazy, pretty much. Started skipping meals, started running around all over the place, etc., just waiting for that trigger to happen again. Because that trigger created some kind of desire, some kind of longing, some kind of wanting that just kept that rat going back for more. I am not asking you to give electric signals to your customers. Turns out you don't need to do that. There is a smarter way of doing it. And turns out that us as human beings actually feel the same kind of longing by technology, by luxury goods, junk food, romance and sex. All of these create that same form of longing. And now, talk about junk food. The longing for junk food keeps growing and growing and growing till you've actually had that scrumptious burger. And after that, it dies down, right? You can apply that to all of this. I want that Tumi bag. It's so good. Every time I pass by the airport store, I want it. You bought it. It's gone. You want to tap into this nucleus accumbens and you want to give that signal. Want your customer to keep coming back for more. That is the trick of variable rewards. Turns out there are 3 types of variable rewards that all of us as human beings like. One is tribe. This is what Nir Eyal calls it. I like to simplify everything. Tribe is all about collaboration. It's all about gratification. It's all about me getting something from the community or engaging with the community. So if I do something with people, if I collaborate with people, if people like, share, comment on things that I do, that gives me a reward. Right? You wake up in the morning, you've posted something last night. How many of us don't do this, right? You want to know how many people have liked it. You want to know how many people have commented on something that you did. That's the whole concept on which all social networks are built on. That is the variability of it. You do not know if she has responded. You do not know what she has written. You will know only when you enter into the product and when you actually read that. And that is the variable reward that you're longing for in this context. The second one is hunt. Best example of it in real life is a casino. You go to a casino because there is a variable reward of money. You do not know how much whether you're going to hit the jackpot or whether you're going to lose money or what's going to happen every time you turn that dial because it's a variable reward. What gets you hooked into a casino? In a real world sense, I wake up every morning saying, what is this crazy guy going to write? Right? You know that's what Twitter is built on, right? You're going there seeking information and it's variable. You do not know what you're going to get there every single day, especially if you have guys like Trump there, right? And then the third one is self. It's about perfection. It's about balance. It's about improving yourself. And in a technology world, the best example you can have is gameplay. Going to the next level, mastering this particular level, earning those points, just getting through that level. Don't you feel that nucleus accumbens trigger every time you're just not able to crack that level and then you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? Why do you want to get that done? Because you have this hunt for this variable reward self. Of course, there is social currency there, etc., etc. But fundamentally, you want to master it at a personal level. That is your variable reward there. And the last one is investment. Turns out, if you make your customer a part of your product and make them do those little actions, you create stickiness, right? The best example of this that, again, Nir Eyal brings up is IKEA. So IKEA, the model is not just to save the carpentry cost or the assembly cost or whatever. What they're making you do inherently is build the product. And you know what's going to happen the next time, and obviously now IKEA is a time-tested model. But when you invite somebody home and you've built that chair from IKEA, you're going to be demonstrating how beautiful that chair is because you have invested in that chair. You have been a part of creating that chair, and now it's your chair. It's not something that you just bought from a store made by somebody else. You have built it. That is the best example of actually getting somebody to invest in your product. Now, the two things to remember about investments is, number one, an investment loads the next trigger. Remember the trigger we spoke about, the first part? And it's a circle, right? The more circles that you do around that model, the more it will associate behaviors towards your product. Yeah? It loads the next trigger. Example, WhatsApp. So why do you send a message on WhatsApp to your friend? What do you get by that? You send, hey, good morning to somebody and you exited the app. You got nothing out of it, right? There was no instant gratification from it, but it has loaded the next trigger because that will happen. You will see that badge notification there, which will draw you back into the application because now you know somebody has responded. And now you are going to go back there to read what that person has responded because now it's becoming a conversation. Simplest example, right? Or it stores value, right? Now value can be in different forms. Virat Kohli has 33.8 million followers the last time I checked. Amitabh Bachchan pretty much has more. All of us, I have 4,000 followers today. Will I, if Twitter asks me for $1 a year, will a Virat Kohli with 33.8 million followers be more willing to pay that $1? Or will somebody who has 3 followers be more willing to pay that $1? He has invested in building that follower base. He's going to be more inclined to now be a part of your journey, stay with your product because he has invested. He has loaded value there. Or you build a reputation on Airbnb, right? You get ratings on all kinds of platforms. That's about building value. On Spotify, you create and you share playlists. Spotify has already learned your habits and now you have invested in that product so that it knows exactly what you want to listen to at any point of day, or there's a high chance. Will you switch from Spotify to a new product easily now? You are already tied in because you have value associated with that product. So these are the two things to remember about investment. So I know it was a lot of gyan. I'm going to round this up now. Before I get into practical examples of this, is there any question around these 4? Is there anything we want to discuss around these 4? The trigger, external, internal, and I have the most simple example of this right here, so you can even kind of refresh it with a Facebook in mind. All of us know Facebook. All of us know exactly how it works. The action, what is that small action which will get some kind of a reward? What is the variable reward that I can get once I get into your application, and what is that little investment that I can make you do or do? Yes, Ruchin. And come back again, yes. To draw her back, exactly. They are linked, yes. The diminishing return part is what I mentioned in terms of, you bought that bag. Tomorrow if I'm going to give you the same there, you're not even going to look at it because your longing has gone away. How do you make sure that you get that longing, but then you get the next longing, or you get that variability of it, so you keep coming back into it? It's exactly that. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Ruchit because, and I'll give you a bit of context of the fascinating conversation we had. But first of all, super easy, right? I just want to run through some very high level examples of how to apply the model. Yes, sir.
Especially this part of the market, consumer target, where this general field of neurology is organized with many of the applications, because I have worked with some neurologists to find out, because I'm a social entrepreneur. My consumer base is also stressful, $1 living customer. So there, how we can take this model to that segment of market consumer and make it work.
Can I park your question till Ruchit shares his fleet management example here, living example, and we will come back to this after that if it's not answered. I fundamentally, at a very high level, I believe that the triggers that you have, physiological, psychological triggers, they are irrespective of affordability. They are irrespective of where you are on the pyramid. They are basic human triggers. So depending on your product, depending on your proposition, depending on the behavior you want to drive, you can always apply the right triggers there. But to make it more practical, let's come back to this after we hear from Ruchit. Facebook, I'm going to run through two more examples. Stack Overflow, pretty much any techies out here know it. What is the... Oh, actually, I didn't talk about Facebook here. So trigger. More important are the internal triggers. I am feeling lonely, I will go to Facebook. I seek connection, I will go to Facebook. External trigger, I see a notification, it's drawn me into the app. Yeah. Action, I log in, I open the app, I enter it again and again and again. That's the action, right? And remember, there's an arrow going round and round and round. The more you do it, the more you get locked in, the more stickiness is created. Yeah. Variable reward. I do not know what I will see on the feed. I might see a new update from somebody. Somebody's got a new job. Somebody's got married. Somebody has moved somewhere else. Somebody's posted great information, etc. An old memory comes up. Isn't that a beautiful example of Nirayal's model? It just draws you in. Hey, did you know you did this in 2007? And everybody immediately has a smile. Then you go and share it with all the people you shared that memory with. That is the variable reward which Facebook has mastered. New friend request. Oh, I didn't remember this guy from college. Let me go check about him. Investment, share, like, comment. That is the easiest example of investment you can find in any product, right? That's what Facebook makes us all do. Adding friends. You have created 500 friends. There was a time when people used to come and say this. I have 500 friends on Facebook. How many do you have? That is the value that has been associated with this product, which makes us come back to it. And then, like I said, the cycle repeats, right? Stack Overflow. Trigger is, I'm tired. Let me go and read up, blah, blah, blah. I want to test and improve my knowledge. I think that is the most important trigger in the context of a Stack Overflow. Somebody said, hey, check out my answer. Right? And you want to go and read what was answered. So either you are seeking information, or you're trying to test your knowledge, or you're just going to participate there because you're going to learn. Action, you log in and you post a question and answer. You read questions and answers. You increase your knowledge base. Rewards, you're voted up. Doesn't that make you feel great? I gave a great answer. Now I feel great about it. People are liking my answer. I'm going to do it more and more. Investment is reputation. I have achieved a certain level. Think about it in any context. I am a expert level in so and so forum. I have achieved these points. I have put that effort into it. I'm not going to go out of there once I've achieved a certain status. Fortnite, gameplay, right? Another very, very simple example. What is the trigger? Boredom. I've cooked all of these up myself, so you can challenge it. But I mean, these are pretty obvious out there. I'm seeking connections. I got a notification from a player asking me to come and play with him or her. The action I do is I accept the invitation. The variability of gameplay is the key, right? So I have, I am going to search for customizations I can do. I don't know if I'm going to win or lose. I don't know what I'm going to be creating there. I don't know what's going to be thrown at me inside the app. And then the investment is it called V-Bucks? I'm not a Fortnite guy, but that's the currency you earn, right? You earn V-Bucks there. You have money associated with it. You can customize characters. You can spend money in-game. That's the whole investment piece. Yeah. I wanted to do this exercise. I don't know if we have time for it because I want to do one more section before we go ahead. But I want you to spend a few minutes, if you've never done this before, and while it is still fresh in your minds, to think through your business. And I have some specific questions for you to think through. And share with the rest of the team, it would be brilliant. Number 2 on the triggers. I believe if you have a proven product today, the external triggers is something that you would be doing already. Where are you inserting those external triggers to draw people into your product? But can you think of few internal triggers? How can you be front and center in the minds of your customer when that internal trigger happens? How can you make sure that when that internal trigger happens in that nucleus accumbens, they think of your product? Can you think of that? Because then you've cracked this. Yeah? Then to the action. Are there any resources lacking that you can help your customer with to make sure that the action becomes easier and easier and repeated? That action could be time, money, like we saw, effort, difficulty level, doing what other people do versus making them do something very different, or non-routine, right? So is there any simplification of action that you could think of doing to your existing product today which would make them cycle through your hook model more and more? Variable reward. Is the reward fulfilling enough? But more importantly, is it variable? Will it make them keep coming back for more? Or is it like, oh, this is a one time, I got what I wanted, doesn't matter, any other product is going to give me exactly the same thing? Are you able to make it a variable reward? And then, maybe too much detail, but can you think of ways of doing either the social gratification of the tribe or the hunt where they can come and look for more information, or the self-reward where they can better themselves in your product, depending on what the context of the product might be. And lastly, of course, can you make them do a little bit of work on your product so that they will keep coming back and treat their own product, or you've just created such a big switching cost because they've invested value into your product that they are not going to leave.